Ever since the release of Honkai Star Rail in April of last year, a residual yet significant topic of discourse that has been circulating throughout the shared community is the noticeable difference in attention, care, and as of late generosity of each game's respective developers. Though it's been present from the beginning, the contrast has only become more conspicuous over time, coming to a head after the tandem occurrence of Star Rail announcing a free distribution of Dr. Ratio to every player, and the controversy surrounding the rumor of a free skin selector that was hotly anticipated, only for players to find out that for you to actually have access to this privilege, you had to buy a PlayStation 5, and it was reserved only for China, I believe. The recent chain of events has elevated the tension between players of either or both titles, creating memes about how HSR is Mihoyo's favorite child, while Genshin's turned into a cash cow that's being milked for all it's worth. Against the wishes of many and the dismay of several, Genshin and Star Rail continuously get compared to one another, to which I admittedly am guilty of doing a few times myself, despite being fully aware that they are two completely separate games under separate conditions and circumstances. Either way, what I find interesting about this occurrence is how unique it is. Parent companies often have multiple titles that are for all intents and purposes commercial successes on comparable levels, yet there's not nearly as much infighting going for them, if any at all. More concerning is whether or not this will be exacerbated with the upcoming release of Zenless Zero in the near future, another game produced by Mihoyo. Today we'll be looking into why all of this is taking place, the possible factors that led to it, and how it can be addressed so that both games can be mutually successful and highly regarded. So I want to preface this by saying that I don't personally have a bias for either game. In my humble opinion, Genshin Impact excels at ABC, while Honkai Star Rail excels at XYZ. Though they bear many similarities, whether visually, mechanically, or foundationally, I can't exactly say one is definitively better than the other, nor do I have a preference for either. I love and hate both of them equally. Now before we continue further, I want to bring to light a post I found on Gacha Gaming a while back that caught my attention. Sometime in September, an article was written on mobilegamer.biz highlighting how successful Star Rail has been on a commercial level, easily surpassing $1 billion in sales less than half a year into its release. And while this did cement Honkai Star Rail as a household mainstay, coincidentally, Genshin's revenue took a noticeable hit around the same time, implying that Star Rail is extracting sales and revenue from Genshin. Granted, this is mostly circumstantial. Bear in mind that late spring, early summer is the least active time of the year for Genshin, as around that season nothing particularly interesting happens in the game aside from a few unremarkable events, and most players are waiting for the new version and subsequent area to come out like we have for Sumeru and Fontaine. Moreover, the event banners of version 3.7 and 3.8 consisted almost entirely of reruns, with a handful of them being, bluntly speaking, low-demand characters for the majority of the player base for the simple reason that most of us already have them. Now if you read through the article yourself, you'll notice very quickly that whether this can be interpreted positively or negatively all comes down to your perspective. So by no means am I saying that this has conclusive bearing on the matter of this video, it was just something I found rather interesting. At present, Mihoyo is in the midst of a crossroads. Following the once-in-a-generation success of Genshin Impact, the company has taken its newfound resources and influence to push its brand into other genres and industries, attempting to expand over the gacha sector by capitalizing on its various fields. Honkai Star Rail is their shot at trying to capture the turn-based RPG market, and Zenless Zero aims to dominate the roguelike genre. A natural consequence of diversification, though, is that it takes attention away from the main source, Genshin Impact. Again, that is neither good nor bad, but in the eyes of, at the very least, a vocal minority of players, this has caused a fair bit of strain within the new, unusual relationship formed between Genshin and Mihoyo's other titles. When Star Rail came out, it was extremely apparent that many of its gameplay features and mechanics were not only inspired by, but almost identical to Genshin's, from equipment to constellations to the user interfaces to character progression to the overall feel of the game and whatnot. While I'm sure many of us appreciate the familiarity in that it made Star Rail easy to pick up and understand, the extreme similarity between the two games has resulted in them being compared with one another, whether or not it was for the right reasons. I don't really blame them either. When two things closely resemble each other, it's in our nature to compare. In addition to being very similar games, Genshin and Star Rail largely share the same player base. With Mihoyo having a virtual stranglehold over the gacha sector, they're bound to market to their current audience, since despite being real-time action versus turn-based, two fundamentally contrasting genres, gacha players don't put that much consideration in what they're playing on account of the more casual and surface-level nature of gacha games in general. In other words, the industry doesn't have dedicated fan bases based on genres the way FPS players are zealously loyal to FPS games, or how MMO players dedicate their entire gaming lives playing only MMOs. This is the first major reason why this internal competition is happening. Genshin and Star Rail are both gacha games, no matter the subgenre. Gacha games, or rather mobile games in totality, are inherently incomplete experiences. What do I mean by that? Games with complete experiences allow the consumer to partake in the game however they please. If they so desire, they can play either 30 minutes or 30 hours, ill-advised as that may be. What's more is that games with complete experiences offer you a wide range and depth of exploration that is aimed at making you play the game for as long as possible, and to give the player full freedom and access to achieve their goals, whether set by the game or self-imposed. The ultimate endgame of any, game is to achieve these two outcomes, to have fun and to complete goals. Mobile games by design break away from this ordinance by technically restricting you from achieving either. The finite energy system within all of them prevents you from enjoying the game to your heart's content, while simultaneously barring you from achieving your objective by time-gating everything, unless of course you're willing to spend, and even then some of them limit you on how many refreshes or things you can do. This pay-to-play more business model, employed especially by gacha games, contrasts from most other titles which afford unlimited playtime, subsequently forcing a set limit on the pace in which a player can achieve their goals. Now you could say Genshin and Star Rail are not explicitly pay to play more in that the only things constrained by the energy system are progression-oriented aspects like farming artifacts and relics or sentient materials and whatnot, which is true. If a new player were to join the game, there's basically nothing stopping them from going all the way to Mondstadt to the end of Fontaine, which is dozens upon dozens of hours of playtime in story and exploration, far exceeding the length of a standard game. The thing is, character and account progression is still an integral part of one's experience playing either title, therefore to some extent still preventing them from going beyond a certain point that can only be alleviated with time. It would be the same as a Pokemon game allowing you to fight all 8 gym battles in the Elite Four in one sitting, but your Pokemon are hard capped to level 20 and can't progress to level 30, 40, 50 without refreshing your, we can call it Pokeresin. In addition to that, gacha games are notoriously superficial in light of their aim to cater towards a broad audience. Comparing Genshin and Star Rail to Breath of the Wild and Persona 5, the latter two have far more expensive icebergs as they're intended to be, while Genshin and Star Rail do go above and beyond the standards of other gacha games in terms of depth and whatnot, especially from a narrative perspective. Gameplay-wise, they still have that simplicity to them. It wouldn't be wise for Genshin to have complexity on the level of GTA 5, Skyrim, Cyberpunk, The Witcher, as that would do more harm than good for their target audience who don't want to play that hardcore of a game. So for gacha, they're far and away much better than the vast majority, but in the end, they're still a gacha. You're not going to expect Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft mechanics on a gacha game. Point being, they're not meant to be treated as full-fledged games. They're meant to be played sparsely, not something for one to dedicate all their time and energy towards. For casual players with neither the time nor willingness to grind 8+ hours a day on this game, this is a good thing, but for those who do want that, what are they going to do while they wait for Genshin to recharge resin and stuff? Most likely they'll play Honkai Star Rail, right? There's a high chance for them to compare the experiences between the two games because, on top of being routinely played alongside each other, the aforementioned resemblance between them further encourages that line of thinking. As an example, let's take two very successful titles made by Riot Games, League of Legends and Valorant. Though there are definitely players who frequent both games, each one is a complete experience. League and Valorant allow you to play them as much as you want, and the overall sense of scope for these games is measured in years, not weeks. Not to mention, everything from the user interface to the mechanics and whatnot are tailor-made to their individual experiences, with their own fully realized systems too. You could make a few comparisons, like whether or not a Valorant champion is inspired off a certain League champion, but the games feel more distinct from one another, despite being made by the same parent company. They're mutually exclusive. There's not much comparison between League and Valorant because League players are too busy playing League and Valorant players are too busy playing Valorant. They're not looking over at each other's plates, so to speak. But for Mihoyo, an overwhelming majority of Star Rail players were once or still are Genshin players. I'm willing to bet 90% or more, to be honest. It's much more feasible to play through both Genshin and Star Rail, while trying to sink your teeth in reaching endgame in both League and Valorant is next to impossible. So Mihoyo's games are more accommodating in regards to time. The same can't be said in regards to money though, leading us to the second reason why the two games are antagonistically compared to one another. The bulk of player frustration with Mihoyo's games is almost entirely founded on the basis of spending. Gacha games are inherently controversial because they can become very expensive very quickly, and for those who lack the wherewithal to invest hundreds if not thousands of dollars on the game or simply choose not to, they're perpetually disallowed from experiencing the full game. They don't get access to every character, to every weapon, what have you, already putting the community on a short fuse. For most of Genshin's timeline, players have been inconvenienced by shortcomings in various areas. Lack of quality of life features and creature comforts, terrible progression system, inconsistent execution of design elements such as how they make some characters feel really good to play while others have a mountain of issues, and bad public relations in general. An incident that exemplified this was when an entire firestorm started over Genshin's 1-year anniversary rewards, or frankly lack thereof. It came off as an insult for a company that was making huge profits off the game to be so parsimonious when it came to free rewards and delivering on heavily requested features. Though technically Mihoyo owes us nothing with the game being free-to-play, players feel entitled to at least a sense of appreciation for their financial support, making it all the more disheartening when the company shows very little of it. The 1-year thing wouldn't be the first time this happened either. In late January of this year, just a couple weeks ago, there was another cascade of backlash towards Mihoyo with Genshin's Douyin account losing over 1 million followers from Chinese players being dissatisfied with the Chinese New Year rewards. Many of their other social media platforms have lost a considerable number of followers too. Prior to Honkai Star Rail, players were exhaustively and understandably frustrated towards Mihoyo for how little they seemed to care about Genshin. So when Honkai Star Rail came out and immediately demonstrated their willingness to please, it came off as favoritism, kind of like the anime trope where the older sibling gets neglected by their parents after the younger, more gifted sibling is born. Star Rail reciprocates both the financial and social support through great quality of life updates, tons of free rewards, and consistently well-designed 5-star characters, one of which was given to us for free. It's almost as if Star Rail and Genshin are being overseen by two completely different companies. So the community's resentment towards Genshin festered for over 2 years, and then when Star Rail came out, it just exploded. What makes this all the more aggravating is that Genshin is still being updated. It would be an entirely different story if you were comparing a new updating game to a game that's discontinued and no longer being maintained. Kind of like how Pokemon fans don't look at Diamond and Pearl and curse Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald for not getting the same features because those games have finished their development cycle. But Genshin is still being updated and receiving new stuff. It's not just that they've been neglected, they're continuing to be neglected. Several users across multiple platforms have noted that much of Mihoyo's complacency and indifference could be as a result of their lack of competition, giving them no incentive to be more generous or acquiesce to player demands. There have been attempts at trying to one-up Genshin like Tower of Fantasy, and we all know how that turned out. On the other hand, there's a plethora of turn-based and auto-battle games in the gacha industry. Star Rail's overworld exploration is frankly non-existent. Your enjoyment of the game is determined almost completely by the game's combat, which is also far more rudimentary, at least when compared to Genshin's, which has more nuance. So it's expected or possibly necessary for Star Rail to be more generous and accommodating with its rewards and updates. Or to put it differently, Star Rail's true competition isn't Genshin Impact, rather the greater gacha industry as a whole, whereas Genshin has almost no competition in this department. If I'm being honest, the only thing gacha about it is the pull system and maybe the resin system. If you took those parts away, it could very easily pass off as a standalone open-world action RPG. So by all accounts, Star Rail and Genshin should not be compared to each other, but circumstantially they are given how similar they are. I think the reason there's so much outrage over the contrast in how Mihoyo's teams handle their respective games comes down to a question of fairness and consistency. Any gaming company worth their salt would make an effort to put in the same care and attention into everything they do in order to portray that image of consistency, especially for continually updating products. Ideally, the efforts made to Genshin and the efforts made to Star Rail should be considered individually, not in the context of each other, but considering they share many features, share the same parent company, and share the same player base, many of whom actively play both at the same time, it doesn't justify the comparison, but it does explain it. Call it suffering from success if you will. Unfortunately, Mihoyo would likely rather its own games be fighting against each other than for a competitor to threaten their bottom line. But regardless of whether all this is just meaningless backlash from immature fans or genuine warranted concern, this is indeed a bad thing and should be addressed. There was a comment made by Madara5458 in my community post regarding this that sums up exactly how I feel about things. Players aren't mad that Star Rail's getting big rewards and cool features. They're mad that Star Rail is the only one getting big rewards and cool features. They're not asking Mihoyo to retroactively give us tons of stuff to make up for past versions. They're asking Mihoyo to be consistent going forward, and there's a big chance that will apply to future games too. Mihoyo shouldn't abandon their existing games just because there's a new one. They should endeavor to maintain the same effort, or better yet, redouble their efforts to existing titles. For example, Riot Games didn't stop developing and working on League just because Teamfight Tactics, Legends of Runeterra, and Valorant came out. They try to stay consistent with all their products. Personally, as someone who cares a great deal about the relationship between game developer and player, that's the whole mission statement behind my 3 channels, to bridge that language barrier, metaphorically speaking. Mihoyo's only way of fixing this controversy is by giving Genshin Impact the same attention, or more importantly, giving Genshin Impact the same respect that they give Star Rail, and by extension all future titles. Genshin is what brought Mihoyo to the forefront of mainstream attention in the first place. They would do well to remember that, because if they don't, Genshin might drag down every other game with it. What are your thoughts on this topic? Do you believe it's right or wrong for the two games to be compared to one another, and do you think there's something more to it than the factors I talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.